My name is Dan King. I'm one of the owners, and I'm the Vice President of Production and R&D for Davey Textile Solutions in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Now I'll see if I can make this work. So I like to say that we're the little engine that could build reflective trim. So we're not a huge company. In 2010, we decided we were going to start manufacturing that trim. It's kind of an interesting voyage. Prior to that, in '86, when we started up, we were doing distribution of textiles. But most people know that textiles is on a dramatic decline, so we had to move into something else. So we're now a global manufacturer, a manufacturer of global distribution is a better way of putting it. We're distributing through most of the Americas. And we're partnered with 3M, making that the triple trim, we call it. So in 2010, when we decided to take this on, we really knew nothing about manufacturing. Didn't know what OEE was, didn't know any of this stuff. Didn't even know how to turn on a loom, frankly. So we got into it and we started figuring it all out. But we quickly realized if we didn't start automating stuff, we would be on a losing battle. We're competing with some big companies in Asia that do this sort of stuff. So we had to get good fast. So right away, we tried to figure out how are we going to start monitoring what we do? And that's really where we started partnering with Uptake in trying to figure out a measurement somehow of what is downtime. So we started quickly learning all these terms, and we figured out what OEE was. So OEE, as most of you I'm sure know, it's a gold standard for measuring manufacturing productivity. It's a true measurement of true productive measurement. So we know what percentage of what was potential and what we're actually getting from that. It measures three things: on-spec quality, the overall performance, and the amount of you're using in the available time. And what I liked about it mostly was it was comparative. Not only comparative to benchmark data like comparative analysis against your competition, but also comparative to yourself. And that's what I think was really the driving force here. I want to know what I am doing today and what I'm going to be doing tomorrow or what I was doing yesterday. I want to make those sort of analyses. Oops, wrong direction. So I don't know where I got the actual construct here, but basically the strategic direction we had was to try to define all of our equipment into five categories. So digitization, monitoring, diagnostics, control, and then automation. So each one is on its own pathway. So the equipment we use, most of you are probably familiar with the term looms. So in the looms, we had to find some way of digitizing the information coming off the looms. The looms are pretty nice looms out of Switzerland. They're pretty high tech. They've got computers on them, but sadly those computers I could not interface with. So we had to design, with the existing sensing points, we had to design our own microprocessors to draw that data up and send it somewhere. So that's where the digitization was. Then we were able to start working with some other systems to start getting into monitoring and diagnostics. So that, just the tech side of that was relatively easy. I'm a computer scientist, I can figure the tech out pretty easy. But one of the things and I think all of you, I see some head shaking, cultural adaptation was probably the thing that I was least prepared to deal with. I had a bunch of operators that didn't really want it. They were very intimidated with this interface that we were coming up with. So that's one of the challenges. I can give all the awareness and training I want, but trying to get them to move towards this was a bit bigger challenge. So what challenges were we seeing? Well, we were seeing manual data. Okay, so we have these little digital displays and I'm writing it all down onto sheets of paper. Limited availability for the analysis. We had some resources, Excel and all this stuff. We could put all that data in there and we could play with it. Production capacity, we had arbitrary targets. Somebody would say this and we'd go and do that, gut feel on this. And I say that in decision making, gut feel analysis. We think we can get more out of that machine, so we should go work towards that. And also the bottleneck of just limited capacity, not really knowing what we have and where we can go with it. So what were the solutions we thought through? Well, we know, like as a computer scientist, I can say, well, I can automate some of that stuff. I can bring that data across. I can single source. I want a single source of truth. At the time, of course, I'm looking at some ERP data. I'm looking at my own data. I'm looking at handwritten data, all these different data sources. When you start comparing them, they're not saying the same thing, and that was a challenge for me. Down to bottlenecks. I wanted to see how could I expand my capacity. So those were all the different things I was looking at for solutions. So, of course, I think I'm sort of overstating the obvious. By doing some sort of an implementation like this, I was targeting reducing costs, reducing my risks, increasing my revenues, and that was important to us. We wanted also an environment that had security for people, security for process, and security for data. So that's what the little metric on the right there is for. Okay, so this is a depiction of the type of loom we have. So what I needed to do was find some way of interfacing to that device, taking the derived data from that, getting it somewhere, and then being able to analyze that data somewhere else. So obviously, pretty straightforward information there. But what I was really concerned with is the device agnostics. I didn't want to be tying into a Siemens PLC over there and a such and such PLC, no disrespect to Siemens, by the way. I just didn't want to be dealing with it, interfacing all these different devices. I needed a device that I could put everywhere and tie into the existing sensor systems. So that's really what we were looking at from the equipment side. I wanted a single source of truth, but I wanted it to be first of all, scalable and a recognized platform. So we partnered with Uptake Fusion, so our data goes there. And we also wanted a very straightforward way of interfacing to that data. We didn't want to have this proprietary this and proprietary that, to try and get that data out. So I'm using Power BI, I'm using Power Apps. That's the way I'm interfacing to the data on the right-hand side there. Trying to keep it as simple as possible to deal with and to develop into. So this is just a very simple depiction. On the left truly is what we used to get from our equipment. There it is. Everybody's probably familiar with that handwritten data. And this is a good indication of what I'm working with now. So I can at a glance, I can see blue indicates uptime. Okay, good. I'm doing fairly well. Could be doing better, but I'm doing fairly well at a glance. So starting to think through, like, how did this affect the company? Well, I was dealing with a challenge. So you can see where COVID came into the play. Let's factor COVID out. But I was dealing, as a production guy, I was dealing with a challenge. This is how we're growing in this industry. So I needed to figure out, how am I going to scale to that? And I had no good information to say, this is what, like at 100% OE, I knew what a machine could produce, but I couldn't really do the math very easily. So I needed to get some better information for that. So ultimately, I targeted full-scale implementation from a digitization. All of our equipment's going to be digitized by the end of March this year. That's going to be our first target. Through this information, I was able to say, to scale to what I project now off this, I needed another 50% of our equipment. So I just went from 23 looms to now 35 looms. So that's a little bit of a growth challenge, trying to capture all that. And just so you can see this on the employee side too, we've been scaling. So back in 2016, I was sitting around 20 employees. Now I'm up over 70, or in the 70. So now where are we at? Well, we now have in partnership with Uptake, we now have a great single source of truth. The data is coming from digitized systems, being fed up into that. And now I can actually see what specific targets I'm after, or apply a target and move towards it. Decision making is a lot easier for me to work through, and I've definitely eliminated some of my bottlenecks just by that equipment expansion. So key learnings now, the little fun part of this one, we actually developed this in Google, and when we transferred it over to PowerPoint, they were all ones. So I have a whole bunch of number one priorities, or number one learnings. User adaptation, and I'm intentionally not saying adoption, I'm saying adaptation, because I think adoption says I'm going to drive this down somebody's throat, and that's not really the mindset I want to have. I want to create systems that they'll slowly adapt to, and we have to build that into our strategy. But you're just fighting a losing battle if you're trying to push somebody into this process. You've got to work with your people to try and have them adapt to it. One of the things I found very interesting is Moore's Law really applies here. As soon as you develop a strategy, that probably is obsolete, especially if you're putting it into your strategy, defined equipment. What we need to do is look at more at architecting a solution and moving slowly towards that goal. So I said it was very difficult for me to develop an enduring strategy, because as soon as I developed it, it sort of became obsolete. Hello? There we are. KISS. We need to keep all of our interface to our operators simple. We just simply overwhelm them. I'm a guy that likes to see data, and I like to see loud flashing lights and everything else. They don't. It's too complex, too busy, it just overwhelms them. And I find that I have a lot of operators that are just simply scared to see what I'm coming up with next. So keep it simple. Keep a single metric on your screen if you can. That's what I've learned from the process. The battery might be going on this, I don't know. I love this. When I was first got into manufacturing, I was sitting down with one of my mentors, and he gave me advice saying, do not fall in love with your equipment. He said, I've observed that people tend to buy an asset and they want to drive that asset for the next 50 years, but it might be obsolete in 25. Don't fall in love with your assets. Well, I say the same thing. Don't fall in love with your ITOT. I see too many people trying to find ways of interfacing into antiquated sensing systems rather than replace them. We can spend a lot of money doing that. I've got some PLCs on equipment, and I think it's going to cost me more money to interface into that existing PLC than for me to put my own sensors on them. And then finally, the number one point, only build what you need. Don't overbuild. And that was my big lesson I learned. We like to build things. We like to make things glorious and fancy. Overbuilding doesn't do you any good. You're just going to have wasted data, wasted resources, and that's not going to do any good. So basically, that's my thoughts.